Mr. President, first Detroit Auto Show in 3 years.
Yeah.
Is the pandemic over?
The pandemic is over. We still have a problem with COVID. We're still doing a lot of work on it. But the pandemic is over.
That was President Biden as he kicked off an explosive interview with 60 Minutes' Scott Pelley. However, he was at odds in that remark about the pandemic being over with future host over the Young Turks, Nina Turner. The former Ohio state senator tweeted that the pandemic is not over. What do you think, Batya? Pandemic over? I say yes. Over and done for sure. What do you think?
The pandemic has been over for a long time, but not because our leaders ended it when it should have been ended, but because they are, like the president, leading from behind. The American people at some point realized the truth of the matter, the actual science of the matter, which is that this is endemic and we have to live with it. And the people in charge have been, simply following that lead. I mean, we've overseen the real death of expertise because it was the American people that decided when the pandemic ended. Where are you on this, Robby?
Yes, it is over. It has been over. Everyone who wants to give themselves reasonable protection against severe disease and death can do so. I encourage you to do it. It should be your choice, obviously. And anyone who still wants even beyond that protection, you can still, and if you want to, that's fine. Wear one of those really good masks that have like 85% filtering out of particles, according to the scientists, whatever. Fine. You are so protected if you do that. Good for you. For everyone else, it's over. And it's been over.
Amen. So we want to bring you a few more moments from this piece. Later in the interview, Pelley pressed Biden on new inflation numbers and Biden's economic woes. Let's take a look at that.
Mr. President, as you know, last Tuesday, the annual inflation rate came in at 8.3%. The stock market nosedived. People are shocked by their grocery bills. What can you do better and faster?
Well, first of all, let's put this in perspective. Inflation rate month to month was just an inch, hardly at all.
You're not arguing that 8.3 is good news.
No, I'm not saying it is good news, but it was 8.2 or 8.2 before. I mean, it's not. I can make it sound like all of a sudden, my God, it went to 8.2%. It's
the highest inflation rate, Mr. President, in 40 years.
I got that, but guess what we are? We're in a position where for the last several months it hasn't spiked. It has just barely, it's been basically even.
I guess it's good news that it hasn't gotten any worse. That seems to be the president's standpoint on all of this. I don't know, which is fine, true. The economic, conditions aren't deteriorating as rapidly as they looked like they were doing a few months ago. But inflation is still way too high for many people, for working people. Food prices, energy prices still too high, although gas has come down quite a bit, which is good. And that's all, that's all to the good. And that might improve Democrats' prospects come November. But it is still quite high by historical standards, no?
It is still quite high. On the one hand, before the student loan forgiveness debacle, I would have said, look, there's only so much the president can do about the price of groceries, for example. Obviously, that's being impacted by the war in Ukraine. The price of gas is being impacted by his energy policy, which I think is very bad. But, there's some of it that he really can't control. But he just passed a policy that is going to flood the economy with money, raise the deficit in the form of this student loan forgiveness. So I think that really showed where his heart lay. My main opposition to that was not even the inflation argument. It was the unfairness of it and the injustice of it. But a lot of Republicans were opposing it on inflationary grounds. So at that point, I think really his claim to care about this, his claim to sort of be doing everything he can is quite facetious. Gas has gone down, but that's because he's been releasing these reserves, right? That's not a good thing for us, right? That's not a good thing for our nation. Instead of sort of, pushing drilling, instead of saying, oh, let's bring back the Keystone XL pipeline, he's been depleting the reserves. So I feel very worried about that. And it's not as bad as it was. He's right about that, but he cannot claim to have been doing or have done everything in his power to bring it down.
Yeah, basically every political figure who pretends to care about inflation runs into the problem that, well, then why are you voting for even more spending? Because invariably, this is a problem with both parties, right? They always, well, the Republicans especially, they criticize Democrats for all the reckless spending they're doing when they're in charge, and then Republicans take power and spend just as much, if not more. Democrats then spend even more, but they have less of a even pretending to care about that. Runaway government spending, a large, according to economists, I didn't make this up, large contributing factor to inflation. So, Biden obviously has to pretend like it's not that big a deal because, part of the government spending in also spending that was in the Inflation Reduction Act, the oddly named for my taste. But when it came to Taiwan, Biden said that U.S. forces would indeed defend Taiwan if invaded by China. But he seemed to be at odds with his own administration. Let's watch.
We agree with what we signed on to a long time ago. And that there's a one China policy, that Taiwan makes their own judgments about their independence. We are not we're not encouraging their being independent. That's their decision.
But would U.S. forces defend the island?
Yes, if in fact there was an unprecedented attack.
After our interview, a White House official told us U.S. policy has not changed. Officially, the U.S. will not say whether American forces would defend Taiwan. But the commander-in-chief had a view of his own.
So unlike Ukraine, to be clear, sir, U.S. forces, U.S. men and women, would defend Taiwan in the event of a Chinese invasion?
Yes.
Which is quite a commitment. And the interviewer there, Scott Pelley, makes a great point that, well, we're not even committing ground troops for Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So you're saying we would actually commit ground troops, actually military forces for Taiwan. That would be far beyond what we're doing for Ukraine. And what we're doing for Ukraine is already something I would argue that a whole lot of American people don't support, don't think is the right strategy, and that does risk, an outbreak of World War III. Actually committing our own military to defending Taiwan would much more directly, or in theory at least, cause World War III. So I guess it just becomes a question of, is Biden saying this because this is a kind of deterrence sort of thing? Like he's saying we would do this so that China doesn't invade, not that we actually would defend them, or maybe we would actually defend them if China invaded. I don't know. It's so hard to tell because the administration is not being clear, and it's different based on what Biden says, what the administration says, and what do you make of it?
Well, I don't know what sense it makes to say U.S. official policy is different than what the president of the United States says he is committing to, right? That just makes no sense.
Well, it could be in Biden's case because maybe he's saying things and he's not actually in charge of anything. They just let him go out there and talk, and actually the decisions are being made by grown-ups.
Well, that's a very dispiriting thing to contemplate, right? I remember when President Trump was president, and you would have these people from his cabinet secretly or anonymously saying, "Oh, we are undermining him." Like, that's really problematic. If the president says this is our policy, it's very strange to me to have people come out and say, "Actually, that's not our policy." That there's something really scary to contemplate about what's going on there. It's a very difficult question. I totally agree with you. I don't think that the American people has an appetite for this. I'm sort of anti-interventionist. I don't see why we should be getting involved in these things. It's very hard for me to imagine China actually taking that step right now, given the difficulties with the Chinese economy right now. I mean, it's not actually doing very well in terms of projections. All of these sort of economic projections about how they were going to overtake us as an economic superpower seem now to be very, very premature. I said this about Ukraine and Russia, and I was totally wrong about that. So, it's very hard for me to imagine that China would take that step right now. But the idea of committing U.S. troops to something like that seems to be insane. And so, while I don't like the idea of the president's cabinet undermining him, I also hope that our official position has not changed.
Well, and I agree I share the impulse to, of course, oppose China invading Taiwan. Taiwan deserves to be free and independent, as do all nations or pseudo-nations where the people, want to live free of the kind of tyranny that China and other repressive governments represent. I wouldn't want to live under, so they have political repression. Their COVID policy is draconian. There's so much that I wouldn't want to live under, and I sympathize with everyone who wants to live free of oppressive governments. But then it becomes a reality check. Like, what can we actually do to help? And are the people willing, the American people willing, to commit actual forces to doing this kind of thing? And that's where our leaders often just presume, oh yeah, right, everyone would be fine with that. But they don't listen to the actual people, which opposed it, or quickly tired of it in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in other places. And right now, I don't think love what we're doing in Ukraine, which is partly responsible for the food prices, energy prices that we're experiencing. Now, before we go, one more clip of this interview. When asked about running for re-election, Biden left viewers with a cliffhanger. Here's that.
Look, my intention, as I said to begin with, is that I would run again. But it's just an intention. But is it a firm decision that I run again? That remains to be seen.